Greetings from Costa Rica, and thanks again for joining me. Today we're talking about that time I met the President of Costa Rica, Oscar Arias Sanchez. And more than anything, I also want to talk about why meeting the president, this particular event, and everything that was happening then was relevant to explaining Costa Rica in a quick anecdote of a nutshell. If you're interested in moving to Guanacaste and you're thinking of investing near Playa Tamarindo, do be sure to email me at matt@costaricamatt.com. Also be sure to subscribe to my channel, hit the notifications bell, comment, like, do anything you can to help me out. I provide hours and hours of lengthy Costa Rica information, and I do it all for free to empower people like you who are thinking about coming down to Costa Rica as well. Let's start off really quick with a brief history of the recent presidents of Costa Rica before we go down memory lane here. If you watched my channel before, you know that pretty much for the post-World War II era, there were two dominant political parties in Costa Rica's landscape. One was the PLN, and the other one was the PUSC. In Spanish, one is Partido Liberación Nacional, and the other one is Partido Unidad Social Cristiano. Those two parties were alternating in the presidency and held most of the important offices in the country from World War II until recent memory. Oscar Arias Sanchez was president first in 1986 to 1990. He is a candidate, he was a PLN president. Partido Liberación Nacional was definitely one of these left of center parties, not that far left whatsoever. They absolutely believe in the strength of the public sector. They've always been a friend of the unions here in Costa Rica. And funny enough, the PLN in our area, Santa Cruz de Guanacaste, has an extremely strong base. There are people here who would vote for a PLN mayor for this county, even if that mayor had been convicted, or rather had many, many alleged crimes. You see people who are fiercely loyal to this party. And part of the reason is that, yes, after World War II, Costa Rica was successful in bringing so many people in from the lower class upward that those political parties that dominated the landscape at that time were definitely seen as entities that were achieving success. And of course, part of that success was the liberalism of opening the doors to world trade, etc. So Oscar Arias Sanchez had actually done a presidency. He was president from 1986 to 1990. In Costa Rica, the president cannot be reelected to consecutive terms. There is a one-term consecutive limit for anybody who's president. And the funny thing is that Oscar Arias was reelected president 20 years after the start of his first term, again in 2006. So he was, like in the US, I guess it was Cleveland who served the non-consecutive terms. Oscar Arias is a president, of which there are several in Costa Rica, who served for 4 years, left the presidency, did other things, and then came back. In 2006, he was pretty popular despite the global economic crisis. His successor was a woman named Laura Chinchilla. She was also from the Partido Liberación Nacional, or PLN. But then after Laura, you actually had something different happen for the first time in a while, and another party won the presidency. There were two candidates in a row, which would have been in 14 and 18, who were from the PAC, or the Partido Acción Ciudadanía, or some combination of those words, or the Citizens Action Party. And those two presidents, I pull up their names so I don't mess up either, Luis Guillermo Solis and Carlos Alvarado, definitely had the challenge of governing in a country where two very strong parties didn't want you to be successful. And you definitely see in these multi-party systems here in Costa Rica, PLN and PUSC were alternating the presidency. Both of those parties normally have, between the two of them, a majority of the legislature seats. So when you get a third party candidate that wins the presidency, the last thing that either the PLN or PUSC would want to happen would be for them to be wildly successful and popular. For example, just as Laura Chinchilla was leaving office and the PAC was taking power, about 2 weeks into the presidency of poor Luis Guillermo Solis, the entire country's payroll system for the teachers of Costa Rica, one of the biggest public sector unions, went offline when they tried to upgrade the system during the transition in the leadership. So immediately there was a national payroll glitch. The teachers went on strike, and the beginning of the PAC's first presidency was a national teachers' strike. I think it lasted over 6 or 8 months. Dimitri, were you here when that happened? Oh no, it was a long one, and they struck until every single last teacher had been paid up to date. So that was one of the things that happened when they transitioned. 8 years later, you saw yet another third-party candidate, Rodrigo Chavez, our current president, win the presidency. He was another outsider, absolutely spoke with these sort of populist terms and that sort of slant that's very popular these days with politicians. He's actually, in my opinion, done a very good job on keeping his image as a populist, as somebody who's fighting for the common man, good so far. He's done, I think he's one of the more popular presidents at this term point in his presidency, which will last through 2026. But without further ado, let's get back to our trip down memory lane here. Jerry, awesome to hear that you're in Coco. I would say we should meet up, except I never go to Playas del Coco, and I'm probably not going to. If you want to come down to Junquillal, let's meet up. But here, let's talk about that time I met the president in 2009. So first and foremost, let's go back here and please pardon just how ridiculous my t-shirt is here. In 2009, I was a United States Peace Corps volunteer in the community of La Florida de Santa Cruz. I was a very different person then. Here I'm with a little school group. I owned a horse. I actually owned 2 different horses while I was in Peace Corps in this town. And I even obtained my certificate for pig management. That was one where the government was offering to pay locals to give courses if you could sign up enough people in your community. So actually one of the people who's here, I think, oh no, Doña Alice is not there, but the aunt of this person here, Doña Alice, gave a pig instruction course. They needed 8 students for her to get her paycheck. So I signed up, and I think this is right after I had just injected this pig. Anyhow, in 2009, the government built a highway out to Paraíso de Santa Cruz, our little town here. I will actually, I'm going to bring that up here. Actually, we'll talk about that in a minute, but they did a paved highway out to our community, and to inaugurate this paved highway, they threw an event to which Oscar Arias, President of the Republic was going to come to inaugurate it. Let's look at this photo to begin with. And absolutely, I love it to death. I'm so glad I found this from 2009. This is the event for the president. We're sitting at a local roadside restaurant. Here is the President of the Republic himself. Here is a local community leader named Doña Telma. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor or not, but speaking at the podium is a local community leader, Doña Telma. And yeah, the president is right there. He's in a Lacoste golf shirt, some pants, and I think he had arrived about 15 minutes before the event. There were 20-some people present. And Oscar Arias got up, gave some remarks at the podium as well. I still remember he's made some really nice comments on the fact that it's wonderful to be inaugurating highways in Costa Rica and not spending our money on the military. And afterward, here you can see Costa Rica Matt, 25 years old and going for broke, asking in his best Spanish, Señor Presidente, ¿podría sacar una foto conmigo? Whatever I was begging him to do. And yes, folks, the Nobel Peace Prize winning Oscar Arias Sanchez was more than happy to pose for a photo. I was super stoked. I was actually with a friend who had specifically said, you should go and try and get a photo with the president. But look at this. When you showed up at this event, there were no scanners. I could have been armed to the teeth and they wouldn't have even checked me as I came to meet the president. Interestingly, you can see the guy in the background, he was definitely doing his job. And if I remember correctly, so the president came to this event in a single SUV, so there was no motorcade, and it was him and either one or two other people. The other people in the car included this guy, who I think is a photographer because he's got one of those kinds of vests. He definitely wasn't security. He's got an umbrella there, but he's checking me out. And if he was security, you don't have to blame him. He was doing his job from the start. I'm coming up here, and he was reviewing the situation to make sure it was all kosher. But anyhow, this is me at an informal gathering of 2 or 3 dozen people meeting the president of Costa Rica because, this was 14 years ago. The country hasn't radically changed that much since then. But you've got an absolutely different level of tension around political figures here in the country than you do in the United States of America or Canada. In fact, I think that one of the biggest things that I love about Costa Rica, year after year, even more, is just how small of a country this is. I mean, it's really not a big place, and you end up getting to interact with people even at the highest levels of power. I got to meet Oscar Arias a second time. I didn't get a photo. I really regret it, but I was actually, he went to Indiana, to my alma mater, DePaul University, to give a lecture, as the Nobel laureate, etc. And we were able to get tickets to that, and I got to meet him again. I think that had to be a year where we still didn't have cell phones that take pictures. So I wouldn't have thought to take my old digital camera. But anyway, one of the things I wanted to touch on as well as we look back at this picture of the event and talk just a bit about how small Costa Rica is. The lady speaking at the podium is someone I don't know at all in 2009. In 2011, when I got my job directing a watershed protection organization, she was the first person to sign up as a community leader to then help me in building rapport and trying to advance the objectives of the watershed organization. Not pictured in this photo, somebody else who was at this event was my colleague Jürgen Chinchilla, who has now joined our office 14 years later as an agent, one of the guys who's part of my team. He was there as well at this event. He had actually been instrumental in getting the highway paved. And it just goes to show you, folks, this is a charming, beautiful, small place where even people like Costa Rica Matt can meet the president. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next week.